you ever hate something so much you become absolutely convinced that you simply must be wrong? Like, there's a level of vitriol you feel that simply cannot be justified. That's kind of where I'm at right now with the Black Crowes. I'll be the first to admit, this is not a band that deserves my hate. I may never have liked them, but I can certainly recognize that nothing about the Black Crowes' actual music deserves to be hated on the level that I used to feel for it. There are problems with it that I can identify, but that's basically as true for them as it would be for anything else. You know what? Maybe for once I won't try to analyze why I feel what I feel. Maybe I'll just accept whatever reaction I have to this stuff as a given. What else can I do at this point? It's not that big a deal. Not everything is supposed to be for me. The Black Crowes' smash hit debut album, Shake Your Moneymaker, came out almost 30 years ago. I'd have to be some kind of incurable crank to treat music that I don't care for from such a bygone era as some kind of personal affront. And yet, I can't claim that the experience of actually trying to listen to this music and pay attention to it has gotten any easier for me. There is still something about this band that sets off my personal kill it with fire response. I think when I was younger I told myself I hated it because I considered it to be boring hippie ripoff shit, but I think I've embraced enough unoriginal bands over the years that this really shouldn't be an issue anymore. I can only conclude that my entire problem with this band stems from Chris Robinson's vocals.
Hey, little thing, let me light your candle, 'cause the mama, I'm sure all the hand and I just around.
He may very well be my least favorite singer of all time, which is weird because he's got a pretty good voice. The guy can hit notes and reasonably approximate human emotions in his singing. What else do you need? With just hits exactly the right frequency to stab me in the brain repeatedly. Well, this might be kind of a hyper-specific pet peeve thing, but for some reason, something about that weedy, whiny, nasally vocal tone and timbre he sings with just hits exactly the right frequency to stab me repeatedly in the brain every time I hear it. And normally I am very accepting and tolerant of different styles of singing. I can't even say this is the worst I've ever heard, but isn't it possible to recognize ability while registering only disgust? And what's worse, I don't think that this style of singing fits with the type of music they're playing at all. The southern rock of the Allman Brothers, the bluesy swagger sleaze of the Stones, and the psychedelic boogie of the Faces. These were the Black Crowes' forebears, and none of them had singers who sounded like this. I've never cared for Rod Stewart's singing, but at least his voice didn't seem to contradict the music. Although in interviews, Chris has stated that he tried to sound not like Stewart, as to whom he is so often compared, but Stephen Marriott, the humble pie singer who Stewart replaced in the Faces. Whatever, this is clearly just my lonely little personal problem. I'll do my usual bio albums breakdown and let you all judge whether I'm being unfair or not. The Black Crowes are from Marietta, Georgia, and originally formed in 1984 as a band called Mr. Crow's Garden. Pretty much the only two constant members and primary creative forces are brothers Chris Robinson on vocals and Rich Robinson on lead guitar. I don't have time for an overview of all the lineup changes they've had over the years, but here's a handy chart from their Wikipedia page. The band started when the brothers Robinson were in high school, and apparently they used to have a more psychedelic REM style influence in their sound. Despite the somewhat rigidly homogeneous conception of classic rock they became known for, reading early interviews with Chris reveals that at least his tastes are a little more hip and diverse than they let on in their sound. I wish they'd have held on to some of those influences long enough for anyone to hear them, but by the time their debut album Shake Your Moneymaker came out on Deaf American in 1990, they had pretty much gone all in on their retro throwback revivalist aesthetic. I mean, good for them. Bands should play what they enjoy the most. And it's not as if it was obvious at the time that there was a market for this kind of stuff. Guns N' Roses are still arguably the biggest band in the world at the time, but the Black Crowes managed to reappropriate the same general Stones/Aerosmith vibe without coming off as a hair metal band in the least, which is somewhat impressive. It's not quite alternative rock, but it at least qualifies as reminder rock. If nothing else, it serves as a useful reminder that, hey, rock music used to sound like this. It would be going way too far to suggest that they paved the way for alternative rock in any sense, but it's interesting to note here that a lot of what became known as alternative was essentially old 70s rock styles updated and refashioned for modern audiences. It's just that the Black Crowes were borrowing from a whole different set of bands than the ones that ended up codifying the genre. I applaud their unique vision. The hit singles are still not very good though, and neither is much of the rest of the album. There's the first single, Jealous Again. Which is a bit too redundantly Stonesy and lacking in hooks for my taste. Then there's a cover of Otis Redding's Hard to Handle, which was the song that first broke them into the top 40. Certainly the original's a great song, and maybe if it was anybody else but Chris singing, I'd enjoy it, but as it is... Like, was that ever credible to anybody at all? Who's going to believe this thin-sounding, whiny dork is even slightly challenging to handle? I'm frankly shocked that this ever worked. Then there's... uh-oh. Here it comes. Can't stop it. It's the thing that should not be, the one Black Crowes song that I actually like. This This is Twice as Hard, which is a fitting title because it sounds like they're trying twice as hard as on any of their other songs. This one hints at the more unified sound they'd eventually develop, which weds bog standard classic rock to a more rootsy form of southern rock. I just can't deny riffs and hooks that are this great, and I even think Chris's voice makes sense within the sound of it. Bravo, guys. You can stop now. Please, please don't do anything else. I hate songs like this. I think it's supposed to sound kind of gospel-tinged and soulful, but it just comes off as lifeless to me and drags on for 5.5 fully immersive minutes. The vocals are in their laziest wannabe bluesman mode here, and this one guitar part possibly qualifies as the worst, most unimaginative riff I've ever heard. It sounds like they accidentally recorded someone practicing their scales, which is an important exercise, but it doesn't impart very much emotionally. Speaking of things that are supposed to be gospel and soul, why do I feel like I'm watching the opening credits of The Wonder Years? This album peaked at number 4 in the Billboard 200, and by the time of their next follow-up, it had already sold over 5 million copies. For better or worse, the Black Crowes were definitively the first new band of the 90s to reach that level of success. That's something no one can ever take away from them. If you have any casual curiosity towards the Black Crowes, this is the album you'll want to hear. It has all of their most well-known songs, and although they did change in pretty significant ways over the course of the decade, they never really strayed from their original tried-and-true sound. And if for whatever reason you decide this is your sort of thing, go ahead and move on to their sophomore album, 1992's The Southern Harmony and Musical Companion. Commercially, the Black Crowes had nowhere to go but down from their first album, and if their sound was charmingly anachronistic on the first album, it had to have sounded outright obsolete by the time grunge was a thing. But I have to give them credit, it never seemed like they were motivated by money in the first place. At least Chris sure wasn't. Nothing on here is as catchy as Twice as Hard or Hard to Handle, and building on the momentum of their runaway success seems like the very last priority for them. Instead, this album focuses on stretching their song lengths and ensemble playing out like never before. If there's one 90s trend the Black Crowes actually seem to have had a hand in, it's the rise in popularity of so-called jam bands, and it started with this album, bolstered by their reportedly epic live shows and increasingly Grateful Dead-esque presentation. It's hard to make up your mind sometimes. 3 of the songs here surpass the 6-minute mark, and they certainly seem uninterested in writing tight, digestible radio singles. For fans, this might potentially be called their best album, since it hews closest to the first album's formula without letting so many of the songs just peter out and die like they did on that one. Predictably, it did not sell anywhere close to as well, so maybe that's why they started to subtly tinker with their sound on the next album, Amorica, released in 1994. It may just be me, but I swear I can detect traces of more alternative rock-style riffs on this album. The songs are still jammy and rooted in older sounds, but occasionally there are moments that seem to suggest the band has actually heard a rock record made after 1975 once or twice. This shift in songwriting style is reinforced with the switch from George Draculius to Jack Joseph Puig as producer, giving the record a more modern feel overall. Admirably, their sound continued to expand on 1996's Three Snakes and One Charm, which brought in slightly funkier riffs and more R&B style arrangements while maintaining the same southern rock sensibilities and Grateful Dead style psychedelic leanings as on previous efforts. Tensions between the Robinsons were running high going back to at least the Amorica sessions, exacerbated by creative differences, lineup changes, legal troubles, drug problems, and presumably a heavy dose of the plain old burnout. And perhaps they weren't quite as chill with being a niche, under-the-radar band as they let on. On their 5th album, By Your Side, released in 1999, the songs are more focused and concise than they'd been since Shake Your Moneymaker. The band is going out of their way to remind people that at one point they were a popular and straightforward mainstream attraction. Still, their best efforts at recapturing some of their early pop appeal didn't stop them from ending the 90s as a washed-up shell of the once god-level success they had been. The Black Crowes went on hiatus in 2002, following the release of the previous year's Lions. In 2008, they released a 7th album, Warpaint, which famously received a negative review by a critic in Maxim magazine who had not listened to it. Their final album to date was released in 2009, and it's called Before the Frost, Until the Freeze. Since that time, the old tensions between Chris and Rich rose to the forefront yet again, leading to their final definitive breakup in 2015. By all accounts, the split was a bitter, acrimonious thing caused by disagreement over ownership of the band name. Both Chris and Rich have since performed Black Crowes songs with different bands, but at the current moment, in early 2019, it doesn't look like they'll ever perform or record together again. A consciously backward-looking dinosaur rock band like this should not have even lasted for as long as they did, so I've come to feel a grudging respect for the Black Crowes as a concept, and I've learned to accept that their music just isn't for me, and their singing especially isn't for me. But can I let you in on a little secret? One that probably throws all of my problems with the Black Crowes into sharp relief. Promise not to tell. Ooh, closer.
I've never really cared for the Rolling Stones either.
I'm Jacob, and this is Rad 90s Music. I'll see you sometime in the future.